Oh, great googly moogly, there's a lot more of you than last time. Glad to have you all here. I truly do appreciate it. At this rate, I may have to actually start working on that Discord channel pretty soon. I don't want to keep you all too long when you're here for the tutorial, so let's get into it and save the conversation for the end of the video. Today, we'll be going over some of the nitty-gritty of combat, primarily status effects. Let's start with how to read a skill. Firstly, each skill comes with its name and light cost. Then comes the first possible tag, the On Use tag. Tags describe the different pieces of a skill. On Use describes effects that trigger before you roll any of the dice. Next, you have the dice on the skill, showing the die size and power bonus. The dice can have tags on them too. The most common are hit or clash win effects, which are self-explanatory. I should note, however, the crit tag. A crit in this system simply describes when you roll max value on an offensive die and hit. It has no innate benefit, but the crit tag and other effects will come into play when a crit occurs. At the end of the skill, you have after use and on kill effects, which again are pretty self-explanatory. I'll go over skill creation when we create a character. Moving on to statuses, these are a major pillar of combat. Statuses are ongoing effects that change the flow of battle and help you open up a ton of different strategies. Statuses come in four main categories: buffs, debuffs, ailments, and boons. Statuses have count, which shows how much of that status is on a character at once. Starting with buffs and debuffs, these are the simplest statuses with very core effects. Each of them come in pairs that have opposite effects. When you would gain an opposing buff or debuff, they cancel each other out instead. So if you have 3 protection and are inflicted with 2 fragile, you are instead left with 1 protection and no fragile. Starting off, strength and feeble modify the power of your offensive dice, while endurance and disarm do the same for defensive dice. Simple. Remove all of these at the end of the scene. Protection and fragile modify all 3 of your damage affinities. Protection means you'll be taking 1 less damage even when staggered, and fragile means you'll be taking 1 more. Remove at the end of the scene. Haste and bind modify the results of your speed dice. After rolling speed dice, but before putting them in order, increase or decrease the results based on your haste or bind respectively. Then remove all haste or bind. This cannot bring a speed die below 1. Now we move to ailments. These are things you'll want to be inflicting on the enemy and avoid being inflicted with. Burn is the simplest. At the end of the scene, take damage equal to the amount of burn you have, then have burn count. Basic damage over time. You get the gist. Tremor is also fairly simple, and by that I mean it does nothing on its own. But when you use the effect of Tremor Burst, a trigger that we'll talk about later, you'll deal stagger damage based on Tremor count. Tremor is limited to 30, but doesn't reduce naturally. Sinking is similar to a stagger version of burn. Take stagger at the end of the scene based on count, then have the count. There's 2 differences. First is that this cannot reduce stagger below 1, which may seem like a downside, but this actually allows you to take full advantage of staggering the enemy early in the next scene. The other is that there's a special effect for players only. When generating an emotion point, nullify that generation and reduce sinking by 1, or by however many emotion points you would have generated. Bleed is another somewhat complicated status. After using an offensive die, take damage equal to the count, then reduce count by 1. Also, at the end of the scene, take damage equal to any remaining bleed count and remove it all. Due to its high damage potential, bleed is capped at just 5 by default. However, this cap is increased by the amount of fragile on the target, so take advantage of this synergy when you can. Last is paralyzed, which is simple but powerful. When rolling a die, a paralyzed combatant will instead take the minimum value, then reduce count by 1. Moving on to boons, these are positive effects that you give to yourself or to allies. Charge allows you to spend it one at a time to re-roll dice that you don't like the result of, but you may also have skills that allow you to spend charge for powerful effects. Charge does not disappear over time. Aggro is incredibly valuable for a tank to have. When an ally is targeted, you may intercept the attack if the attacker's speed is equal to or less than your aggro count. Halve your aggro count at the end of each scene. Thorns deals damage to your attackers equal to its count when you are attacked, or double its count if it was a crit. Remove all thorns at scene end. Safeguard protects you from one infliction of a debuff or ailment per count. It doesn't matter how much of a debuff or ailment is inflicted on you, each instance takes just one safeguard to block. Poise is the inverse of paralyze. When rolling a die, take the maximum value, then reduce by 1. Poise and paralyze nullify each other in the same way paired buffs and debuffs do. There are a few statuses that don't fall into any of these categories, appropriately called special statuses. I'm not going to tell you what they do, because they're specific to certain ego skills, or unique skills, or enemies. They usually don't interact with other effects, and are used as special gimmicks. They can rarely be considered to be in the previously mentioned categories, and in that case, will interact with other effects like normal. Finally, we get to triggers, which are special effects that give new strategies to the statuses. Right now, there are 3 triggers. Tremor Burst, as mentioned earlier, deals staggered to the target equal to their tremor count. This doesn't innately reduce the target's tremor, but most effects that burst tremor will have some additional text that says to reduce it after. Next is Blaze, which helps spread burn. When you trigger Blaze, check the amount of burn on your target and compare it to all other enemies. For all enemies with less burn than the target, inflict X plus 1 burn, where X is every 10 burn the target has above the other creature. For example, if you have an enemy with 10 burn, one with 5 burn, and one with no burn, and you trigger Blaze on the 10 count enemy, the 5 count enemy will be inflicted with 1 burn, while the 0 count enemy is inflicted with 2 burn. If you trigger Blaze against the target and it doesn't spread any burn, you instead inflict 1 burn against the target. The last is Sinking Deluge. When this is triggered, deal stagger equal to 3 times the total sinking count on the target. Then, once the target is staggered, deal 2 damage for every 3 excess stagger. Then, remove all the sinking on the target. Alright, only 2 things left to cover. Let's do attack weight next. This one's a little messy. Attack weight determines how many targets an attack hits. By default, most skills have 1 attack weight, though it's not mentioned anywhere unless they have more than 1. To use attack weight, you must be the one actively attacking. Declare the skill right off the bat, and which and how many enemies you are targeting. AoE skills used this way can still be clashed with, so if you attack multiple targets, you open yourself up to multiple counterattacks. There are some odd interactions that come from attack weight that I need to address. First of all, you can only save a defensive die if it goes unused against all enemies. Second, you can only generate a total number of emotion points equal to the number of dice on the skill. There may be other odd interactions when dealing with attack weight. I honestly can't cover them all, so just do whatever feels the most intuitive. I don't want combat slowing down too much. Finally, let's cover ego slotting. This one is a lot simpler. At level 2, you get your base ego, which comes from your own character, while other ego is obtained during your journey. You usually get an ego when defeating abnormalities, though your GM may give ego from friendlier abno encounters instead. If your campaign doesn't feature abnormalities, you could make ego based on distortions or other ego users instead. If you don't feature those either, just make ego into a very special skill learned from friends or foes along your journey. Ego comes in 5 ranks: Zayin, Teth, He, Vav, and Aleph. You have 1 slot of each rank, and cannot equip an ego in a slot different from the one it's ranked as. Ego is shared between the party, except for base ego, so you can exchange who has which ego in between missions, but only 1 character can slot an ego at a time. Well, that wraps up combat. Hopefully you get the gist of things, but feel free to comment if there's anything still confusing you. This episode was kinda just a list of statuses, I know, but it should be a bit more interesting moving forward. Next episode, we'll start character creation by selecting an archetype and determining our base stats. After that, we'll be creating our skills for that character. Next episode may be a little late, partially because it's going to require a different format than normal, and partially because we're all going to be engrossed in Canto 8. You may have seen the bonus episode I put out last week. I mean, it's somehow my most popular episode so far. I may do more of those for more ambiguous topics in between bigger episodes. Stuff like team composition and GM advice. So stick around for that. Those aren't as difficult to make, so I can get them done pretty quickly if I need to. That'll do it for this episode. See you on the other side of Canto 8. Bye-bye!